Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Pope Metallicus, and welcome back to Rock and Roll Religion, where we've got a very different type of episode today, where we're not going to be talking about, a specific album or series of albums by an artist. We're just going to be talking about an artist in general and his sound and really just feel. That being George Thorogood and the Destroyers, one of the greatest blues rock artists of all time, and just an artist everybody knows some of his stuff and almost nobody goes into like some of the deeper stuff on it. And I think that's a shame because he's got some really great stuff in the back catalog as well. And here to help me do that, as always, is 70s Rock Fan. How's it going, dude?
Uh, Good to be here, mate. Thank you for having me again. I'm a huge George Thorogood fan. Seen him many times in concert, and he's very underappreciated, I think. I mean, everyone knows him, but nobody really talks about him. 50 plus years in the business as well. So,
And that's an accomplishment in and of itself. When you can do anything for
yes.
50 years, you obviously just love doing it, like, because nobody does anything for half a century because they make money doing it.
That's right, and he's one. Yeah, well, you've just hit upon a key thing. He's a working musician. He's a gigging guy. I don't know how many gigs he must have played in his life, but one of these guys that'll play 300 gigs a year.
Yeah.
The money isn't in the records; it's in there in the playing, and he just loves to play live. And having seen him a few times live over the years, he is immense as a live player.
And especially his attitude on stage and the feel that he puts off is very much reminiscent of bands like Motorhead, where they don't give a shit about commercial success or anything. Like, they're there to play music.
Yeah, absolutely. It's and he loves the guitar. He loves his guitar. He plays these blistering solos. His licks are incredible. Fiery, I would say, is his guitar style. Fiery.
Yeah, and it's a very interesting guitar style too, because it's not disciplined in any way, shape, or form. It's just he's just letting that thing ring out as much as he wants to, and just kind of playing what he plays.
Yeah, a lot of emotion, a lot of feel.
Yep. It's a very bluesy guitar style.
Oh yeah, it's blues. I mean, when he came to prominence in the 70s, late 70s, early 80s, it was kind of out of a wave of blues rock stuff like ZZ Top and other acts, and he immediately leapt into the pantheon of great blues rock guitarists. I guess equivalent in Britain might be Gary Moore, except he's more metal.
But and his first real success was an all-time classic with One Bourbon, One Scotch, and One Beer.
Still
song for the ages,
endlessly quotable today. Well, that was the first album, George Thorogood and the Destroyers album. I think that was like 1977.
Yep.
I do remember hearing that on the radio. Funnily enough, it wasn't until Bad to the Bone, which was like 4 albums later, that I really
got into. 1982 that came out.
Yeah, that I really, because just the opening riff of that, I went, what is that? It was just hey. But yeah, George Thorogood and the Destroyers, I went back and got it then. An absolute stone cold blues rock classic and a big seller back in the day in various countries, not necessarily the US, but other places around the world, like the UK and Australia, New Zealand, and various other countries.
Which is amazing considering it is a very American style of music.
It's the most.
It's like the borderline between blues rock and like country.
Yeah. But started off that run of classic songs that he's had that everybody knows and I guess takes for granted now, like Bad to the Bone and Get a Haircut, Get a Real Job, and just a ton of classics. Very American. You're right. It's just such an American style. There is nobody could do it but someone like a George Thorogood. And you were talking about this before we came on. Everyone thinks, well, blues rock, very southern sound. He's from Delaware.
And he's not from like rural Delaware either. No. Like, once you get to like the southern tip of Delaware, like down by where I live, like you will run into some pretty country folks down there and stuff like that. But like, he's from Wilmington. It's like from the capital of Delaware.
But yeah, the Delaware Destroyers, and actually came, funnily enough, when he came out in the late 70s, one of those guys that, even though he was nothing to do with the new wave or punk movements, certainly in the UK, if you were into stuff like that, he also got a lot of kudos from those fans because of his raw style. Yeah, he wasn't all fancy dressed, just black t-shirt and jeans.
Just stripped down, playing a guitar.
Yeah, raunchy playing. He's the sort of guy you would have seen on a bill in the UK with like the Clash or something, you know.
I can see that working out a lot, very well, actually, because they're both very very simple, very low production, just rock guitar players.
Yeah, it was all very, and he was ferociously energetic on stage. He'd jump into the crowd. He'd do the blessing thing with the guitar, which
and you can hear it even in his lyrics, especially with songs like "Who Do You Love" and stuff like that. Like there is no modesty to be had.
No, and great. I mean, the songs are that he picks, even the covers that he does, like Madison Blues.
Yep.
I mean, he still plays a lot of these tracks from the first album today. Madison Blues, One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer, John Lee Hooker track, of course.
Yep.
Just stuff like that. He's still playing it today. All brilliant blues songs in their own right, but not necessarily songs you would have heard by the original artist before. I had, young British guy. I never knew One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer was John Lee Hooker. That's my fault, not anyone else's. But he brought those songs into the limelight,
and he did a lot to make like a lot of those cover songs, like Madison Blues or One Scotch, One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer, his own song. Because they sound very, very different from the original.
Totally associate One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer entirely with George Thorogood.
And Who Do You Love is also a cover.
Yeah, that is an old. Is that Muddy Waters? Who Do You Love?
I think so. Yeah.
Yeah.
Forgive me if I'm the first person I know who did it.
Yeah.
Although a lot of blues stuff, like they've been like these are songs from like the 20s that got brought forward, and this is just the first.
It's Bo Diddley. Sorry, it's Bo Diddley. Yeah,
Bo Diddley. Okay. I know Muddy Waters did a version of it.
Yeah, and then because that's on the second album, Move It On Over, which again he plays Move It On Over all the time. Hank Williams song, Who Do You Love? The Sky Is Crying, which like Stevie Ray Vaughan did after as well, and a lot of guys. Again, the George Thorogoods, like you said, are kind of known as the actual track. If you're not a purist, of course. I mean, I would always think of the George Thorogood if someone said, "Who do you love?" Yeah, I know the Bo Diddley one pretty well too, but George Thorogood just kills it.
Yeah, and he just has this swagger on stage, especially with his voice, of just like being able to sell it.
Hey, you know where you recorded Move It On Over?
No, I don't.
Boston, in Boston.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Dimension in Sound Studios in Boston.
All right.
I don't know about the first album. Oh, that was in Dimension in Boston as well, according to the internet. So
you have a guy from Delaware recording in Boston that sounds like he's from like Mississippi.
Yeah, playing blues rock from the South. I mean, that stuff permeated the entire consciousness of the US, although sometimes much more popular overseas. Like
like we were talking about in our History of Rock and Roll series, like a lot of these guys, like the Beatles, would hear like Bo Diddley or Muddy Waters or whoever, and like worship these guys as like gods, and they'd come over here and they'd be painting the studio.
I know that was the famous Rolling Stones anecdote when they first visited Chess Records, these in '66 or something, and they're all like these British blues enthusiasts, and Muddy Waters is painting the wall of the studio. What
like he's barely making a living over here, but like in Britain, he's like a god to them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Just George isn't so much of a writer as an interpreter, but when he picks stuff, he picks the right stuff, and live he just blows it away. Have you ever heard such a weird song structure as well as One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer?
It's a very interesting song musically.
It's like 5 minutes of talking.
3 different time signatures, and you can never tell which one he's in.
Yeah, it doesn't actually turn into a full-fledged song until like 5 minutes in.
Yeah, right. It's just a guy with a guitar who's just like playing on a stool somewhere, almost like Johnny Cash.
Yeah, a little bit like that. And
he's just a guy with a guitar telling a story, and then it goes into a like actual blues riff. It's like like you say, like 4.5, 5 minutes into the song.
It's like you keep, when's the song going to start? And then all of a sudden, complete change. Yeah. A song that he wrote, though, which I love, and I think my favorite album of his is an album called Maverick,
Yes.
which was much later in the 80s. I guess it was
I
mid
think it was
80s.
85.
85, right? And I had a copy of that on vinyl, which the others I just taped off people because I couldn't afford to buy the records. This one I actually bought. That was the first one I ever bought of his, even though it was quite late, 85. I mean, it wasn't like I'd been working for years, but he does a song on that called I Drink Alone.
Yep.
Which he wrote, which I kind of think is his version of writing a song like One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer.
Yeah, kind of. And it's in the same vein, very clearly.
Because I love it, the lyric of that, because I drink alone apart from me and was it Black, me and Johnny Walker Black or whatever.
The only one who'll hang out with me is my dear old granddad.
Which he talks about Budweiser in it.
Yeah,
we'll forgive you for that now, George. Jack Daniels, Jim Beam, Johnny Walker, Black and Red. Me and my friends, Black and Red. That's what he says.
And Small Time, you're absolutely right. I'm amazed it was played on radio back in the day because it's like 7 minutes long.
It is.
And that was like a no-no back in the day. If you wanted your song played on radio, it was like 5 minutes or less.
Oh, I know. But you hear it now on classic rock radio stations. You settle in for a while. Like you think, okay, this is going to be a little while. But I do love I Drink Alone as well, which is one of his finest.
The song before that on the album is one of my favorites, and one I've shared with Christian a bunch of times, is Gear Jammer.
Oh God, Gear Jammer, what a kick-ass opening to an album.
It really is, especially if you're a trucker. Just like it just speaks to that whole culture.
Yeah, and I liked that album, but like most of his albums up to that point, it was a really tight band. Guitar, bass, drums, a couple of saxophones, and he really made the most out of that lineup.
Well, that's kind of what made him unique in the 70s is he was sticking to that older like R&B or original rock and roll style where he kept the horn section in a lot of his stuff.
Yeah, it's a very 50s rock and roll sound. You're right. Yeah, R&B, almost like an Ike Turner type.
Yeah.
Thing, of that early, black R&B rock and roll.
In fact, I'm kind of surprised he never covered Rocket 88 because that's his exact type of song.
It is absolutely, that would be in that vein of material. But he did do on Maverick, Willie and the Hand Jive, one of my favorite versions of that song, the old Johnny Otis. I've heard Eric Clapton's version, but George Thorogood's is 5,000 times better. No offense, Eric. Then again, Eric Clapton did play it as a laid-back, slow thing, whereas George rocks it up. I do love that. He rocks things up. Ferocious guitar playing. I don't know how you would describe it. What's his sound? I mean,
it's very different, than an Eric Clapton, who's a brilliant blues guitar player, but he's very technical. Whereas George is just very loud and bombastic and just doesn't give a shit about things like rhythm or things like that.
He's got the volume turned up. He can do shuffles and stuff too, but like Willie and Hand Jive. But
he's actually a very talented guitar player. You hear that in some of the slides and stuff like that he does, but he just doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, the slide is another thing I'd forgotten about. He's a brilliant slide guitar player.
Davina, good to see you here as well.
Hey, Davina.
And like Christian says, Howling for My Baby is another great one from him.
Great, yeah.
Like that's what I mean when I say like he has so many classics in the back catalog that no one ever heard on the radio or whatever. Because like everyone's heard Bad to the Bone, they've all heard Who Do You Love, I Drink Alone, stuff like that. But you don't like when you listen to his actual albums, he's got some really good stuff there too.
He has, and even up to the late 1980s, he was still churning out brilliant albums. The first 7 albums are all fantastically consistent. I think after that, he fell away a little bit, not because he wasn't good, but just less commercially successful.
Well, yeah, because anything that wasn't, electronic or rap was kind of falling in the charts in the late 80s, early 90s.
Indeed. And I don't think he's even made an album since the 2010s, a new studio album.
And, after a certain point, you can just coast on what you've already done. And a lot of people do.
I think he switched just to live is his milieu. And he's done some great, but even in those albums, he's done some great covers. One of his albums was Half a Boy, Half a Man, which that song is a Nick Lowe song. And I love Nick Lowe. He's one of my favorite artists still to this day of all time. And it was great to hear him do that. And he rocked it up a bit. Nick's is good, but this is rocked up even more,
And that's what I've always loved about him is even when he does covers, it's not like, oh, here's a rendition of this. It's here's George Thorogood.
That's right. He makes it his own. Makes it his own. Yeah, that's a good is a good album, that Half a Boy, Half a Man. But I mean, I don't think he ever could be said to have achieved huge commercial success in his own country.
No, yet everyone knows some of his songs. Like I said, Who Do You Love or Bad to the Bone, everyone's heard. Even if, like Soul Assassin said earlier, if you've seen Terminator 2, you've heard George Thorogood.
That's right.
One of the most iconic scenes in cinema history. I need your clothes, your boots, and your motorcycle.
I know. Just the perfect marriage of a movie and a piece of music.
It's like that. That's one of the things that makes Terminator 2 just one of the greatest movies of all time.
The shades on and that roof.
It's just like,
because at the time I was going, that's George Thorogood. That guy's great.
And Davina, I would say that's absolutely possible. Like, I don't know of many other rockers from Delaware.
I'm trying to think of any others.
And he's the only one that comes to mind, and I didn't even know he was from Delaware until I started doing research for this episode.
Well, I think the giveaway was the Delaware Destroyer, which is a nickname. Well, that's the only reason I knew. I didn't know.
Fair enough.
In the 1970s, I didn't even know where Delaware was. I thought, well, it's probably somewhere in the south, but it wasn't, of course.
It's such a tiny state that not many people know where it is.
I've been over that causeway, though. That leads that big causeway. I've been over that causeway. That was one of the strangest experiences of my life because I was driving from Virginia over the causeway. I thought, well, this will just be a couple of miles. That thing just keeps on going.
It's like, I think, what is it, like 13 miles, something like that?
And then the stations in the middle that you go. But my wife, who can't stand being on bridges and over water at the best of times, was like, is this thing ever going to end? Oh,
right. It's like, it's like, and it's not like some, river estuary or whatever they're bridging there. It's the Atlantic.
Chesapeake. Yeah. But yes, I don't know of any others from Delaware. I'm sure the crowd will know a few.
Maybe. I don't know.
Sure the chat will know a few.
But yeah, he's certainly the biggest I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I was lucky enough eventually to see him. I mean, I didn't see him back in the 80s, 70s. I saw him on television. He did play over in Britain quite a few times because he had an audience there. But I think from the 90s onwards, I managed to get to see it. I must have seen him about half a dozen times now, I think. Sometimes at festivals and occasionally in theatres on his own. And I was impressed with the last theatre gig I saw him doing, which is maybe about 12 years ago now. The absolute quality of the live show. He had a couple of saxophone players as well, and he gave them tons of time for solos without detracting from his stuff, but just kick-ass.
And he strikes me as very much the kind of artist that you're going to hear stuff live that you would, or hear versions of stuff live that you never would on the albums.
Yeah,
and he's going to embellish and extend parts of the song just because he has fun doing it.
That's it. Yeah, that's exactly right. And an interaction with the crowd. Though. I mean, he's a fantastic stage artist with a crowd, calling out, talking to people.
And that's a whole
side
of the business that I think a lot of artists are missing now, is that crowd interaction and just that natural ability to just interact with an audience.
You're at a gig. I mean, you're not just there watching someone perform. He's actually talking to the crowd
Yeah.
and often going out into them. He does a lot of the blessing and the guitar thing, which people might think is corny, but it's fantastic when he does it. With the
And
cross.
I need to find this video and put it up on the channel because holy shit, that sounds
I'm sure
amazing.
they did. Yes, it's funny because Stevie Ray Vaughan has a similar timeline. Much harder rock blues edge, I would suggest, in some areas. George is
Well, yeah, I
much
mean, he did
more
multiple different
R&B
covers of
boogie.
Jimi Hendrix's stuff.
Yeah, he's much more boogie woogie, George. But I could see them interacting a lot of times, I would imagine, because there was not that many blues rock guitarists of that kind in that era that were
No, it was
prominent.
kind of a niche genre, and like you were either kind of just a fan of it or you weren't. And
Yeah,
this is before the era of like the Crossroads tour, which I'm not sure that, but I believe George has been on it.
he must have been. Surely must have
I
been.
mean, that's right in his wheelhouse. Guys like him, Mark Knopfler, Eric Clapton, B.B. King, Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top, who we're going to cover here in the next couple of weeks.
Well, Billy and George must have interacted many times, I would have thought. And I would imagine ZZ Top were something of an influence. I mean, there's plenty of material in their albums. You can imagine George Thorogood would go, oh, I love that, But yeah, I think there wasn't that many of those prominent guys. There was a few bands I liked at the time, and I'm talking the 80s, that were like the Georgia Satellites and stuff like that are in the same ballpark as a George Thorogood. So there were quite a few bands, but not that many. I mean, if you think of the 80s, he was up against hair metal, new wave, new romantic stuff.
Yeah,
whatever.
blues was not really common in the 80s as an art style. Like
it's always. I mean, no matter what people say, it's always been a bit of a niche.
Yeah, and it's one of those things, like it's a very musician-centric style. Of musicians are into it, but like the general audience probably won't be.
Soul Assassin's talking about Stevie Ray Vaughan's Mary Had a Little great record.
Yeah, it was.
And
I didn't realize that Chuck Berry played on that too.
Yeah. And is that the same as the Paul McCartney version? He did a version of it. Mary Had
I mean, knowing the way the 70s and 80s went, it might be.
I can't remember if the
because you have all of these really weird albums with super groups put together, like the Traveling Wilburys, which was basically like Roy Orbison, George Harrison, and a couple other guys, and Tom Petty.
Well, Mary, back in this, I'm diverting from George Thorogood, but back in the early 70s, Paul McCartney had a single, Mary Had a Little Lamb, and it was a version of the old nursery rhyme. The reason he did it, apparently, he's confirmed and debunked it over the years, was that the previous single was Give Ireland Back to the Irish. And he got so much flack for that. He said, okay, I've tried to do a song about something real, and you all got upset about me, so I'm going to do a nursery rhyme next. And he did Mary As a Little Lamb. Yeah. So I'm assuming it's in the similar vein. It's a version of the nursery rhyme. And I'm just trying to remember if they're in any way connected. There you go. I shouldn't have done that because maybe I was trying to play a little clip. Oh, no, okay, you can't hear that. That's good. Don't want to get copyright struck. But anyway, it's the sort of thing George Thorogood would have done too, I'm sure.
Yeah, and Davina apparently looked it up, and the next closest is Tom Verlaine from Television.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
From Delaware. Okay, and I quite like that first Television record. Christian's mentioned the Fabulous Thunderbirds, another band of that era of a similar feeling. And the Blasters, can't forget the Blasters.
Yeah, Jerry and the Blasters is another one that might.
Blasters are the same blues rock, although the Blasters are a lot of Hispanic and other influences too, because they were from East LA. But there's not that many of them. There's a select group, I would say.
And they're all great.
Oh, yeah. But Tom said, Tom Verlaine's from Delaware. I didn't know that. I thought he was from New York. So there you go. What do I know?
Well, apparently he moved there at a very young age, or he moved to New York with the band.
Yeah. So interesting guitars that he plays as well, though. Those big Gibson, wide-bodied,
Yeah,
hollow.
he's a big fan of the Les Paul.
Yeah, and he's got the ES. Was it the
the ES55, I think.
Yeah, he's got these big with the cutaways, the
Yeah, the
wide-bodied
acoustic
ones.
electrics.
Yeah, and they're just, it's something about the sound of those is warm, but you can make them really rock.
Yeah.
So always great, and they look good on stage.
Yeah, and the ES55 is about perfect for a blues artist too, because you can go completely acoustic if you want to, and it sounds really good. And then you have that real bluesy tone if you want to kick it up to full crunch. That I think so. It sound. I kind of want to play with an ES55 one day. They're expensive as hell. So I probably never will. But
I've never ever played one ever. So, for one thing, they're probably about the same size as me.
Yeah, they're big guitars.
I would play it like the old 60s bands like Jerry and the Pacemakers. They'd play it like this. But yeah, so Tom Verlaine. But yeah, George is, I don't know, he's had a few health problems in the last year or two, and he's knocking on a bit like we all are, but he's still gigging 50 years in,
and that's a testament into it itself, is that you're able to even survive a tour at that age, because it just takes it out of you.
Yeah, and it's the high energy show he does as well. But he's one of these guys that can. I like the fact that he does have the horn section live. Usually a couple of saxophones, but he's had more. I like that. He's not. It adds a little flavor to it.
And like I said, it's a kind of a callback to that old 50s era where, they hadn't gotten rid of their jazz and R&B roots yet. And they still had like horn sections and pianos and at certain sections. And it's a really cool sound.
It is. I've always enjoyed seeing that in certain acts live. I mentioned before we started the Canadian equivalent. There's almost a Canadian knockoff. I'm just sorry, Colin, for saying that. The Canadian equivalent would be a guy like Colin James. I don't know. I know Christian will know who Colin James is. He's I wouldn't say he was the same as George Thorogood, but he's done a lot of the same material in the same style. But he does albums where he also does big band stuff and jazz stuff, country stuff.
And George is one of those artists that's almost impossible to imitate because it's all his feel.
That's right. Yeah. Actually, just share a picture of. I'm diverting from George, but this is Colin James. Later, it's not what he had a number of hits in the MTV in the 80s, so people might recognize some of those. Christian knows him. 5 Long Years and stuff like that. And then this was his first album, the Colin James album. He had the rockabilly haircut and whatever. This is about 1978, 79, 1980. I would be totally unsurprised if he'd played on the same bills as George Thorogood many times.
Would not surprise me, especially touring in Canada.
Oh yeah, but Colin James still to this day is doing great stuff.
Looking at that guitar, that is an ES55.
It is. So he does play a lot of the same style. He'll go out as a stripped down 3 or 4 piece band, maybe 3-piece guitar, bass, drums, and a saxophone, and then he'll go out the next one with a whole jazz orchestra, and then the next one will be more of just a mainstream rock band. So he's George Thorogood, I think, is probably more straight ahead with the blues rock, but he's occasionally dabbled in the other things and live as well. He's played with orchestras and done the the other guy does it, of course, is Brian Setzer. Does that rock and roll orchestra thing, the big band thing.
And I really always dug that about George, is that he's very much a guy who just the show you get when you go to see him live is very different than what you get on the album.
Yeah, I mean, I've never come away from one of his gigs without saying that was great, and it's warm. It's that warm feeling you get when you go, wasn't that so good? Wasn't that just great? Could we have done with another half hour? Yes,
But yeah, and he's high energy enough that no, you couldn't have done with another half hour. You would have been dealing with a guy panting at the end of it.
He's probably slowed down a bit now because over the years he's kind of beefed up a bit. But he back in the day, I think it would have been ferocious. I know that my wife saw him in Vancouver at probably the Commodore Ballroom back in the early 80s, and it was pretty hot and sweaty.
Well, imagine just because of
yeah,
the energy he puts out into the music, like
yeah.
the crowd is going to give that back too.
So what? I mean, if you had to pick a couple of favorite songs, what would you go for?
I would go with Gear Jammer and Who Do You Love?
Yeah, Gear Jammer. Yeah, I think that's a sadly underrated song. We must. I think we do a video about that. I think the album Maverick deserves a video.
Yeah,
That's.
maybe.
I think all the other albums are great, but I love Maverick in
Yeah,
particular
there's a
because he.
lot of really great stuff on that album.
Well, he actually did a little bit of country, and he kind of varied it a little bit. It wasn't
A little
just
bit
all.
country, a little bit rock and roll,
Yeah, and he did his own version of a 50s, like the track Long Gone is
Yeah.
it's like the Bad Boy, which Beatles covered, the old rock and roll thing. It's got that sound to it, it's brilliantly written as well. I think that's probably my favorite album. Gear Jammer's great. I love I Drink Alone. You can't beat some of the hits though. I mean, Bad to the Bone, just that opening riff.
Oh yeah, just that main riff is just
And then
iconic.
into this crunching. Do love that. Yeah, there's just so many good ones. Madison Blues again from the first album. And he sings them great too. I mean, let's not forget he's
He's
playing
not
in.
like what would people would think of as like a really talented singer, but he's great for that sound.
He's brilliant for that material, absolutely.
It's almost
he's
like Lemmy
done.
from Motorhead, where like he's not a good singer, quote unquote, but he's perfect for Motorhead.
There's a track on. It's not my favorite album. It's a great album, but there's a track on More George Thorogood and the Destroyers, which is like his fourth album. There's a track called Nighttime,
Yeah,
which is a cover. That's a brilliant song. He does. There's a band I love called Dr. Feelgood, British band, British R&B band. They did a version of it. George Thorogood's, and I love Dr. Feelgood. George Thorogood's version is better, even better, I think.
well, that's one of the things. He does a lot of covers, and yet he absolutely kills whatever he covers. His version becomes the version of that song.
Yeah, I do love that. So Nighttime would be another one of my favorites. I love the song. I don't know. I mean, it's an old song. I've no idea who did it. It's way back in the 60s. I think it's the same group that did I Want Candy, which is, I don't know if George Thorogood's ever done that, but that's exactly the kind of song he should have covered. I want candy. That shuffling Bo Diddley thing that George Thorogood just nails.
Yeah, he absolutely kills that shuffling blues sound.
Yeah, if
it's like that's just where he eats in terms of his guitar style.
I wonder if he's ever done I Want Candy, because I do love that song.
I mean, he's probably done it live once or twice, because artists like this do covers live that they never do on their records.
Yeah, he must have, because it's one of those classic rock and roll Bo Diddley shuffle things, although Bo Diddley didn't write it. I've got a version, a 6-inch single, not a 7-inch single, 6-inch single by a British band called the Bishops. And it's a ferocious with like just brilliant guitars, but I'm sure George Thorogood must have done it.
Yeah, and like he's kind of the perfect intersection of three different musical styles, where he's got a lot of country in there especially in terms of the lyrical content. He's got a lot of blues, and then just straight ahead rock and roll.
Yeah, I actually cannot. I'm just searching online, and I cannot find a version of George Thorogood I Want Candy. So maybe it was too obvious for him.
Maybe.
But he did do Nighttime, which is a brilliant track. Jay Giles covered it as well.
Jay Giles is another band we might get to at some point, because they had a huge blues influence as well.
Well, there's a schizophrenic band that had basically two careers. The first one was their heavy R&B soul blues period, with the live album, the Jay Giles Band live album from like 75 or whatever. just with all these like soul covers on it. And then there's the pop rock J. Geils band of the 1980 onwards with the hits. Same band, but almost like two completely different sounds.
Again, a guy who sounds really Southern and black, who is a white guy from Boston.
Oh well, that's right. Yeah, But the J. Geils Full House, I think it's called, the live album.
Yeah,
got a vinyl back there with the Smokey Robinson song "First I Look at the Purse" is the kickoff track, and it's practically melting the vinyl. They play it so hard, you know. And again, Mrs. Rock fan saw them back in the 70s or whatever. And she said they were just incredible. But then I saw them in 1980, and they were doing all the pop hits. You know, like what was this big Freeze Frame?
Freeze Frame and Centerfold.
Centerfold, yeah, they were doing that. I actually saw them supporting the Stones at Wembley in 1980. So they played all those hits, and that's what most people knew. They didn't know they had a whole career for 10 years beforehand playing ferocious R&B, you know?
Yeah, well, I mean, like, again, that's a very musician-centric style where, like, most people will go for, like, you know, the really consumable stuff like Centerfold or stuff like that. And they don't know they have all this really serious music behind them.
Yeah. Davina is actually our resident historian, Davina, on all our streams, is saying that I Want Candy, the Strange Loves was the original, but the Tremolos covered it too.
Okay.
Another one of my secret, I'm a big 60s guy, I love the Tremolos. The band that Decca signed instead of the Beatles.
Yeah. We'll have to do. I think we were going to do an episode on that on your channel, weren't we?
We were going to do. Well, I do through Wilco, our roadie pal. He's a big friend of the only remaining member of the Tremolos that's still with us, Chip, and he's going to Len Hawkes, Chesney Hawkes' father. If that'll mean something to British people. But he's been a bit not well recently, but he does want to do a show about the Tremolos, and I'd like to do that. That would be fun. But so Davina was looking up Billy Squire. I hope he stood still long enough for her to do that. It must have been a bit uncomfortable for him.
Here's another one that kind of was on that blues rock bandwagon, and unfortunately for him, sounded enough like Led Zeppelin that everyone thinks a lot of his stuff is.
Yeah. And then he decided a mainstream metal career was better for it commercially, and he did some stuff in the 80s that was more, you'd say it was more mainstream metal, I guess.
Yeah.
With a pop edge, that pop rock metal.
Yeah, almost like Billy Idol with punk, where it's just like, yeah, it's punk, but it's the real popular side of punk.
Yeah, that's right. This is a guy that's doing punk but wants to be Elvis.
Yeah, right.
I mean, we're way off George now, but I mean, I was quite a fan of Generation X in the late 70s, Billy Idol's punk band.
Yeah.
We had a couple of hits, and we were on TV quite a bit in Britain in like 78 or whatever, and you could tell he just wanted to be Elvis.
No, he did. And from the way he dressed to the way he acted on stage to the way to the guitars he played, he was trying really hard to be Elvis.
I know. I actually like Billy Idol. He's fun. He's a fun guy.
And Jay Fury, good to see you, man.
Hey, Jay. Yeah, as Christian mentions, Peter Wolf was the singer in the J. Geils band. Of course, J. Geils was the guitar player.
Yep.
Peter Wolf is the voice and the face. Everybody thinks he's J. Geils a lot of the time. But it was Peter Wolf.
Again, going back to that, 50s style of, like, even from like the early 50s with Bill Haley and his Comets.
Yeah.
So the singer was always the band leader, and then later in the 70s you started to get bands like Black Sabbath or whatever that are actually centered by their guitar player.
Yes, indeed. Well, there's a lot of acts had singers that weren't really. I mean, Jeff Beck couldn't sing to save himself, so if he ever had vocal tracks, it was always a Rod Stewart or somebody that would be doing it. Elvin Bishop, another great blues guitarist, he didn't sing particularly, so he had guys like Mickey Thomas singing like Fooled Around and Fell in Love. That's Mickey Thomas of Starship singing, not Elvin Bishop, that kind of thing. Yeah. It's just
And
some
then there's
guys.
guys who shouldn't be singing and yet do, like
Yeah,
Yngwie Malmsteen later in his career.
I know. Just don't do it, Wing V. Don't do it.
No, I mean, he's worked with some of the best singers in the business too. I mean, his first gig was with Graham Bonnet and
I know.
Alcatraz, who we just talked to on Monday, by the way.
Exactly. I
That
know.
was a
Lovely.
great show.
It was such a good fun. He does want to do more.
Absolutely.
Graham.
I'd love to have him on here to talk about his time in Rainbow.
I'm sure he will at some point, mate. Yeah, we'll do more, and he might come on your. Yeah, I mean, he's a lovely, lovely guy.
He really is. And
nice bloke. What a nice
great
bloke.
sense of humor on him too.
Oh yeah, I mean, you're often worried about, should I crack a joke about something, and he's
Yeah,
in there
like
cracking jokes.
talking about his exit from the Michael Schenker group. I'm like, this might be where this stream ends.
And he's like, no, it was. He was okay with it, and because I was thinking, maybe I shouldn't talk about this, and he was like all over it. It was funny.
It's probably one of those things that's really funny when you look at it 10 years later.
Well, he can't. He doesn't let it eat him up, I guess. He's
Yeah.
like, that was a fuck up, but what the hell? And it caused Alcatraz to be formed. So
Yeah, I mean, like that was the great part of that. And like I said to him, I mean, the man had a talent for shopping guitar players.
Well, if you think about it, I mean, that's what 4 major league ones. He's worked with other great ones too, but 4.
I mean, 5 that we brought up during that stream with Richie Blackmore. You had Yngwie Malmsteen and Steve Vai, Michael Schenker, and Jeff Loomis.
And now Jeff Loomis. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty good going for. And I would say to Duke Graham, it's a testament to his singing that they all want to work with him. Which is it's pretty neat considering he never started out to be a metal rock singer.
Well, and like he was saying, he was basically focused on his own solo career. Never even thought about being in a band until he joined Rainbow.
Never wanted to be in a band yet. It's the opposite for most guys want to be in a band.
And I think his career with Rainbow, even that one album, topped higher than any of Ronnie James Dio's stuff, which is insane to think about.
It did, but partly because they did go for more commercial material.
True.
Yeah, I mean I love Ronnie. I love Ronnie James Dio, and I love those Rainbow albums. But I equally love Down to Earth, and it didn't bother me at the time that it was a change. I said, "Well, great, Dio's going to do his own thing, and now we'll get something different."
And just like Dio joining Black Sabbath, it changed the sound of the band, and they just went with it in a really cool direction rather than trying to be the old band that they really couldn't be anymore.
Yeah, I think it absolutely revitalized them completely, and it freed them from the Aussie image, I think.
In a lot of ways.
Yeah, they were free to be more than they had been, I think, because first of all, Dio had a better range, and they could do more progressive stuff, I think.
Well, especially him being a trained musician and also having played with Richie Blackmore before this, like he's done the major league stuff.
Indeed. So I don't know. I mean, George, did somebody mention the video of George Thorogood? I'm going to look for it of him playing with other people.
Stevie Ray and Chuck Berry.
Let's have a look for that.
Because those are 3 blues rock legends.
I always love to think about this, but George Thorogood, clearly his own man, his own artist, his own band, all these 50 years. I wonder if he ever had the urge to just slip into another band for an album or two and be the guitar player.
He seems like the kind of guy that would and wouldn't even want to be credited. Like he'd just play guitar on somebody else's album and just slip in the back door, essentially.
Yeah, or to do like Johnny Winter did and do an album with a Muddy Waters or somebody and just be the guitar player.
Yeah. At the same time, he has the kind of personality I don't know that he would fit as just a guitar player. Like, he has that attitude.
I found that video.
Excellent.
Chuck Berry, Stevie Ray Vaughan, and George Thorogood, Maybelline, Roll Over Beethoven.
That's fucking awesome.
It is. Okay, they bring them on. Yeah, they come on later. Oh, this is awesome. Sorry, everybody. I'm watching this while we're...
And I'll put that in the description after this stream's over.
Well, I wonder if
we can't play it live.
We could mute it and just let people see it.
That kind of defeats the purpose, though.
That's
the
true.
Whole point is the sound.
Well, what's really neat is that Stevie Ray's dressed up in black suit with a really great hat, and George, for one, he's got a black jacket and a bow tie on. So they're kind of
They actually
dressed
got
up.
George Thorogood in a tie. That's
Yeah,
impressive.
a bow tie. It's the Grammys, that's why.
Oh, okay. There we go.
But the two of them look great together, playing together. I can't believe that's the only time they ever did. Like,
And
they
like
sound good.
somewhere on YouTube, there has to be video of him playing with Billy Gibbons.
I would have thought so.
Because like they're such similar guitar players, and they were around right at the same time. They had to have done it.
That video, though, they've got, you can hear it. So they're doing Roll Over Beethoven, and it's just so Stevie Ray Vaughan, the way he's playing the. It makes it his song almost.
Yep.
But that's really good to see legends like that play. Oh, I miss Stevie Ray, though. Miss him badly.
Oh, man. He's another one like Jimmy, where you wonder what he would have done later in his career.
I just think it's such a devastating loss. I remember the time crying. I think, oh my God, this is terrible.
Because he was what, in his mid-30s when he died?
Yeah. And he'd got over all these addictions, and he was
playing better than ever.
Yeah. The future was going to be immense. Because he would have worked, I mean, he was a guy that could have worked with all sorts of artists in different styles, and like Hendrix could have. I mean,
I would have loved to see what Hendrix would have done with heavy metal in the 70s and 80s, because that was where his style was progressing towards.
You know what I've always dreamt of? Hendrix and Lemmy.
Oh my! Well, I mean, Lemmy was his roadie.
I know, but imagine them in the 80s or 90s
jamming together,
jamming.
Him, Lemmy, and Phil Lynott.
That would have been just
because I mean, the three of them were very close.
Yeah. So, but we should be thankful we have guys like George that have survived. George Thorogood, still kicking it in the 70s. I don't. I mean, if you've never seen it, anybody out there's never seen him, I know he's not doing any gigs right now because he's not well. But if he gets back to it, you won't regret it. It's a lot of fun. It's blues rock, 50s inspired blues rock at its finest. In my opinion.
Absolutely, and I'll definitely be checking him out if he comes to the area.
Well, you're in his ballpark.
Yeah, I'm in his backyard, basically.
He probably lives in LA. Yeah, I just love those old pictures of him though from the first album when he's probably in his 20s, early 20s, and he's
I think he was like 24, 25 when he started.
The hair is going like this, and the big guitar, and just
that's what just the core of rock and roll is just a young kid with a guitar in his hand, just playing.
No artifice. Yeah, I mean, he never relied on flashy videos or stage lights, just lights, play. There's no gimmicks involved in any of it other than he likes to do the blessing thing, which is
and that's just him.
It's just almost stagecraft.
It's almost like Lemmy aiming his bass down at people.
Yeah, it's all about the music. And now that I've thought about it, Maverick, I must do a video about Maverick.
Well, yeah, we'll definitely have to do some stuff on that.
Well, we'll have to do some more George sometime, but then again, time is not on our side.
Yeah, I mean, like we only have so much time in the world, right?
We don't have all the time in the world.
It's all fast and talent over flash was his way.
All the flashes in the music.
Yeah, pretty much. Like the guitar is the centerpiece, and he's just singing along with it.
Yeah, good choice to talk about him. I don't see many. I mean, I can't even think of videos on YouTube of people talking about George Thorogood. They must be out there somewhere, but
I haven't seen him, and it's an artist, like I said at the beginning, that's really kind of underappreciated,
especially in his home country. I think.
I think he was a lot bigger overseas than he ever was here.
Well, in Britain, albums like Maverick were in all the major record stores and were selling well. I mean, you could go in those days, you could buy records in Woolworths or places like that still around. It wasn't like it was obscure. They were up front and center. So pretty popular. And I know that in Australia and certain European countries, he's still huge. So it's funny, a lot of that stuff has to go overseas to be appreciated, even though it's very American music that he's playing.
Yeah, I mean, It's interesting that a uniquely American style of music would catch on that big overseas and yet not be that popular at home.
It's the same thing with the original blues artists. Took British guys like Peter Green's Fleetwood Mac and Eric Clapton to popularize them back into America. You know, they always talked about the British blues boom. It was all they were getting these guys to come over and play in television and play with them. And they were nothing in their home country.
And that's got to be interesting for the original artists too. Like, oh yeah, these really cool artists coming out of England, and meanwhile, the original artists that they were all basing their style on are like, we've been here for 20 years.
That's right. So George is one of those guys who's kept the flame alive for a lot of these guys for a long time. So
yeah, and I think
done
Soul Assassin said at the beginning of this that like blues is one of those art forms that'll just never die because it just speaks to people on such a basic level.
Yeah, and I'm always encouraged, although it's been a few years since 3 or 4 years since I've done it, or 5 or 6 years, when I went to various places like Memphis and whatever, even Nashville or other music cities, to see that on every bar there'd be guys playing blues.
Yeah.
You know, so there's still young guys playing it. It's not all rap and manufactured shit. There are still guys out there playing blues rock in the pubs, you know, in the bars, stick $10 in the bucket type places. In Memphis, they were playing in alleyways.
Yeah,
in Beale Street, you know, blues guys playing this for tremendous blues stuff. So they're still out there. Blues festivals are still popular. It's not dead, and it'll never die.
I would heavily recommend, if you guys are guitar fans, if there's a blues festival playing near you, go to it.
Yeah,
you will not regret it for a second.
Yeah, exactly. You should. There's a lot of young people still playing. Even you've got the older guys that are mostly gone now, but it's still young guys playing. I've been lucky enough to see something like Buddy Guy a few times, and some other guys, and they're brilliant. But it's still young people playing it, and I think that's encouraging because it's not all rap and hip hop and manufactured pop. There are still people want to pick up an instrument and play "Who Do You Love" or something like that. They are still there.
And the modern guys are, influenced by guys like George Thorogood in that era.
Yeah. Oh,
they grew up hearing it on the radio like I did as a kid. And
I would say he's like a godfather of living blues rock guitarists,
And living. There's a ton of guys that probably grew up hearing that on the radio and be like, that's the sound I want right there.
Yeah, and it is a great sound. I mean, you just put any one of those albums on that. Something in it's heavy, but it's not harsh. I can never describe it technically.
Yeah, it's dirty, but it's also really just clinical blues.
Dirty but warm, I find. Yeah.
And maybe the best way to describe it is authentic.
Authentic, yeah.
Like there's no pretense about it whatsoever, and there's no manufacturing to it whatsoever. It's just a guy with a guitar doing what he does.
Yeah, and it's groove. It's got a groove.
Yeah,
it's groovy in the original. One of the original.
Which it's interesting that it has a groove, considering he never plays the same note twice.
No, he can play the same riff twice sometimes.
He can when he wants to, but he doesn't.
It's just warmth. You can tell he loves the material, and that translates into his playing. And I've always enjoyed that. It's not cold. It's not technical. It's
Davida's got the perfect word for it. Lively.
Oh yeah. I mean, just when he just kicks into those riffs.
Yep.
And you're like, give me more.
Right. It's like, when you finish a George Thorogood album, you're just like, I want to hear the next one.
Sounds like more. I want more. But yeah, good. This is great. I'm very grateful. I've managed to see him a few times. And
no, I know you got to go, and so do I. But what do you got coming up, man?
Well, tomorrow, hopefully you won't be stuck at work, but tomorrow I have a very interesting gentleman is going to be on It's Only Talk and Roll. Kevin Harrington, who is a Beatles roadie, and how many people in the world? There's only 3 people in the world could say they were Beatles roadies, and 2 of them are deceased. There's Mal Evans, Neil Aspinall, and Kevin Harrington. And luckily, Kevin is still with us, so he's going to be guesting on the show tomorrow. So I've been prepping for that one. He's got a lot of stories. I think this is going to be more of a storytelling type show. There he is with the ginger hair, holding up the lyrics for John on the rooftop. So he was on that rooftop in the Let It Be, Get Back stuff. Started working with them he worked for NEMS and Brian Epstein. He was Brian Epstein's assistant for a while, and then translated over to working specifically for the Beatles from the White Album onwards. But then he then went on to work with Derek and the Dominoes, the Stones, a bunch of bands in the 70s like Wishbone Ash, Ted Nugent, Cheap Trick, Judas Priest in '82, Screaming for Vengeance.
If I can't be there for that, I'm going to be kicking myself.
Motorhead.
You have a Judas Priest roadie on there. I can't.
Motorhead in '84. He did a Motorhead tour in '84.
Oh man! And as Davina says, he's holding the sheet music gingerly. He worked with thing is, he's a guy that's worked with a variety. He worked with a lot of cabaret acts, or so, like Gloria Gaynor and Tina Turner, Petula Clark, Leo Sayer, Hot Chocolates. He worked with a variety of stuff. It wasn't just the rock stuff. He did other stuff. Work is work, So yeah, I mean, you take the tour, you take the gigs you get.
Yeah, and they paid well, and they had sold out shows. So he worked with Madness, British ska band, for a while. The Tourists, Annie Lennox's first band. We were one of my favorite bands in the late '70s. So he's done a variety of great stuff, but he's done a lot of festivals in the '70s. Worked with Wishbone Ash because he worked with Mark Emery of the Rock and Roll Rowdies, Easy's buddy. They worked with Wishbone Ash for a number of years and did all those festivals in the '70s. Ike and Tina Turner he's worked with. Just the list goes on and on, So, but the Beatles stuff, he's always happy to talk about that era and the shenanigans. So we can ask him about Yoko.
But no, absolutely check tomorrow's video out. I'll probably be on there if I can. My job right now is insane, so I don't know if I'll be able to, but I'll try to be on there if I can, man, because that sounds like a hell of a conversation to have.
Oh, it's going to be very interesting. I mean, it's just the stories. I read his book, and there's a lot of fast. I mean, this is a guy who'd met Hendrix and all these guys.
Yeah.
That's why he ended up working with Eric and the Dominoes, because George Harrison was big with Eric Clapton, and he got to know Eric Clapton through that, and ended up being a roadie for them.
It was being the key word before George stole his wife.
Well, they kind of got over that, They were all still good friends. It was weird. I
feel like that's the kind of thing you never really forgive someone for.
Well, George must have forgiven him because they toured together. But,
yeah.
Hey, bros before wives.
Very true. Very true.
But yeah, the stories in his book about this era. I mean, the people he was hanging out with, the parties he was going to. He went to all those gigs at the Savile Theatre that Brian Epstein owned, including the Jimi Hendrix gig there, which the second night it was cancelled because Brian Epstein died. All that kind of stuff. He was working at the Savile Theatre, setting up the stage for all these bands like Cream and whatever. So it wasn't just the Beatles. He was in that scene, and he was only like 17, 18. It's incredible,
And that's got to be incredible, being a young kid working in places like this, seeing these acts that you're hearing on the radio constantly.
Exactly. He was like, what have I fallen into here? I mean, just from being basically an office runner for NEMS, taking messages around places, and it ends up working intimately with all these bands, but especially the Beatles.
Just lucked into having the golden ticket, pretty much.
He did. He was like,
I don't know how I got here, but I'm here. So,
but you know what? I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah, right.
So that'll be a lot of fun. Hopefully, everyone that's in the chat will be there too.
Hopefully. And other than that, this week, I don't know that I'm going to be able to do a Thursday show again because work is absolutely insane. But the next Random Fandom episode we're going to be doing is on Star Trek. And I hope you guys join me for that because it's one of my favorite sci-fi franchises of all time.
Hey, I grew up with that shit.
Especially the original series in the motion picture era. Even just from the art style, it's brilliant. And I think that's what we're going to focus on because, I mean, It's not like us to, pick a giant topic and then try to cover it in 2 hours or anything.
No, no way. No, I mean, just Star Trek in 2 hours.
No,
Easy.
I didn't start that whole rock and roll history thing as a 2 hour thing, and it ended up being like 9 hours total.
Yeah. It's just talking about biting off, but you did it. So,
and I'm probably going to continue doing it. I think the next one is going to be like more the rise of heavy metal, like the early and mid 70s. Bands like Judas Priest and stuff like that. Maybe going up into Motorhead and a little bit of the NWO BHM stuff, and then I'll cover the punk revolution.
Indeed, intimately tied up with the NWO BHM as well.
Yeah, I mean that's going to have its own video because those are all of my favorite bands.
There was bills at the time with bands from both sides of the aisle in the same lineup, same concerts.
I mean, there were shows in the States where you would go see Saxon and the Ramones in the same show.
I see the Priest 2024 gigs in Europe have got Saxon as the support act.
Yeah, I hope they tour the States with that same bill because
if they
do,
we're gonna go. We are gonna go if that happens. I'm flying to wherever. We're gonna go to one of those.
Absolutely, because that's a show that you just can't miss.
Have to go,
and they've been rumoring it for years, but and I still haven't heard anything solid. But apparently, Priest and Maiden are going to tour again together for the first time since 1982. So hopefully that happens. And that's going to be fucking amazing.
Yeah, we got to get to some of these. Hopefully, I'll be able to walk properly by then. But,
hopefully, these tours actually happen and nothing else horrible comes.
We don't want, more illnesses and whatever. So it's.
But with that all being said, thank you guys for showing up for this episode. It's a little more informal than usual, and I like these ones because it's just kind of more of a free-form discussion of an artist in general that is sadly underappreciated, and I think more people should check out. But thank you guys for being here, and with all that being said, take care, stay safe.
Cheers, everybody.
And I'll catch you next time.